Moving a $2 billion guided missile destroyer through the Panama Canal is unlike anything else on this planet. You've got a 509-foot warship crammed with enough firepower to destroy an entire air force, threading its way through a concrete lock chamber with just a few feet of water to spare on either side, guided by electric locomotives that trace their lineage all the way back to actual mules. And nobody drives. The ship's captain watches from the bridge while a Panamanian civilian takes the wheel. This is the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, the backbone of the United States Navy's surface fleet, and one of the most capable warships ever built. At 9,300 tons, more than 500 feet long, armed with up to 96 missiles, and powered by 4 gas turbines generating 100,000 shaft horsepower, it's a machine built to fight wars anywhere on Earth. And right now, we're going to watch it squeeze through the oldest and most important maritime shortcut in human history. The question isn't whether this ship can survive combat. The question is, can it survive 24 hours in an 82-kilometer ditch in Central America? Today, we're covering everything. The exact dimensions, the electric mules, the Panamanian pilots who legally outrank the captain during transit, the security protocols, the water management system, the strategic reason the U.S. sends roughly 40 warships through this canal every single year, and what the 330-person crew actually does while their ship is being steered by someone else. Let's get into it. What is an Arleigh Burke destroyer, and why does it matter? Before we talk about the canal transit, we need to understand what we're actually moving. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, designated DDG-51, is the United States Navy's primary surface combatant. As of 2025, 74 of these ships are active, with 25 more planned. No other Navy on Earth has anything close to this many advanced destroyers in service. The ship measures between 505 and 509.5 feet in length, depending on the variant. That's roughly 1.5 American football fields. Its beam, the maximum width, is 66 feet. It displaces 9,300 tons when fully loaded. That's about the weight of 6,200 standard family cars. The ship sits 36 feet deep in the water at maximum draft. And it can push all of that mass through the ocean at over 30 knots, about 35 miles per hour, thanks to 4 General Electric LM2500 gas turbines producing a combined 100,000 shaft horsepower. The weapon system is where things become genuinely staggering. Depending on the variant, the ship carries between 90 and 96 vertical launch cells, essentially missile silos built into the deck, capable of holding a mix of Tomahawk cruise missiles for land strikes, standard missiles for air and ballistic missile defense, ASROC anti-submarine rockets, and evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for close-range threats. At the bow sits a 5-inch Mark 45 gun capable of firing 20 rounds per minute. At least one phalanx close-in weapon system, a radar-guided 20mm rotary cannon, provides last-ditch defense against incoming missiles. The ship also carries 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters for anti-submarine and surface warfare missions. The brain behind all of this is the Aegis Combat System, a fully integrated network of sensors, computers, and weapons that can simultaneously track hundreds of targets in the air, on the surface, and underwater, and engage multiple threats at once. In 2024, Arleigh Burke destroyers shot down Iranian ballistic missiles in combat for the first time in history, the first operational use of the SM-3 interceptor. These are not ordinary ships. A Flight 2, a Arleigh Burke costs approximately $1.8 to $2.2 billion per hull. The newest Flight 3 variants, equipped with the advanced AN/SPY-6 radar, run closer to $2.5 billion. The class is named after Admiral Arleigh Burke, the most celebrated destroyer commander in World War II history and a 3-term chief of naval operations. The first ship, USS Arleigh Burke, DDG-51, was commissioned on July 4, 1991, and the admiral himself was present at the ceremony. The Panama Canal, a quick orientation. The Panama Canal is an 82-kilometer waterway, measured deep water to deep water, that cuts across the Isthmus of Panama, connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. Without it, ships making the Atlantic to Pacific run have to sail around the entire southern tip of South America, adding approximately 8,000 miles to the journey. For a warship that needs to reposition fast, those extra miles translate to 10 to 14 additional days of transit time. In a crisis, that's unacceptable. The canal was completed by the United States in 1914 after a decade of construction that cost the lives of approximately 5,600 American workers alone, with an earlier failed French attempt adding tens of thousands more casualties. Control transferred to Panama on December 31, 1999, under the terms of the Torrijos-Carter Treaties signed in 1977. The canal doesn't run flat. Ships must be raised about 26 meters, roughly 85 feet, above sea level to reach Gatun Lake, which sits in the middle of the isthmus, and then lowered back down on the other side. This is accomplished through 3 lock systems: Gatun locks on the Atlantic side, and Pedro Miguel and Miraflores locks on the Pacific side. Each lock chamber fills and drains using only gravity, no pumps. Fresh water from Gatun Lake flows in through underground culverts, raising or lowering the ship one step at a time. The original Panamax locks, still in use today for smaller vessels, measure 320 meters long and 33.5 meters, 110 feet, wide. An Arleigh Burke destroyer, at just 20.1 meters wide, has enormous clearance in these locks. The ship could practically park diagonally and still have room. This is why destroyers, cruisers, and submarines use the canal regularly. The Neo-Panamax locks, completed in 2016, are 427 meters long and 55 meters wide, designed for the massive container ships and LNG tankers that dominate world trade. The Navy's destroyers typically use the original Panamax locks, which are more than adequate. The mules, electric locomotives that do the real work. Here's the moment where most people's mental image of a destroyer transit completely falls apart. You'd expect the ship's crew to carefully maneuver through the locks under their own power. That's not what happens. Inside the locks, a fleet of electric locomotives, called mules, take over lateral control of the ship. The name comes from the real mules that pulled smaller vessels across the isthmus before the canal existed. When the canal opened in 1914, General Electric built the first generation of electric towing locomotives to replace them, and the nickname stuck. Today's mules are the third generation of these machines, built by Mitsubishi, each weighing 50 tons and capable of exerting up to 311.8 kilonewtons of pulling force at 4.8 kilometers per hour. They run on rack and pinion tracks built into the lock walls, powered by a third rail running along the canal side of the track. For a large warship transit, 8 mules are engaged, 2 on each side at the bow and 2 on each side at the stern. Each mule has its own winch and cable connected to the ship's bollards, the heavy steel mooring posts on deck. The cables keep the ship perfectly centered in the lock chamber. The mules don't actually move the ship forward. That's done by the ship's own propulsion, running at very low power. What the mules do is prevent any lateral drift. They are, in effect, a precision alignment system for a 9,300-ton piece of military hardware. The skill involved is remarkable. With as little as 2 feet of clearance on each side of the ship in some sections, 8 locomotive operators must synchronize their cable tension in real time, responding to positional inputs from the canal pilots above. If the bow drifts even slightly, the mules on the opposite side increase tension, while those on the same side ease off. Micro-corrections happening continuously for the entire length of each lock chamber. Historically, the heaviest ship ever to transit the canal was the battleship USS Missouri, at 45,000 tons, which required 12 mules to manage safely. For reference, an Arleigh Burke at 9,300 tons is a relatively easy transit by the standards of what these locks have handled over 110 years of operation. The pilots, the civilians who outrank the captain. This is one of the most surprising facts about any Panama Canal transit, including U.S. Navy warships. Once a vessel enters canal waters, a Panama Canal authority. Pilot boards the ship and takes direct control of navigation, not advisory control, actual control. The pilot issues orders directly to the helmsman, the ship's commanding officer, who might be a Navy commander with 15 or more years of experience, stands on his own bridge and watches a Panamanian civilian drive his $2 billion warship. This is not negotiable. The regulation on navigation in Panama Canal waters is explicit. The canal pilot assigned to a vessel shall have control of the navigation and movement of such a vessel. The master or commanding officer retains ultimate authority over the ship's safety. They can theoretically relieve a pilot if they have clear grounds that the pilot is endangering the vessel, but the pilot is in charge of the transit. Canal pilots train through one of the most rigorous maritime progression programs in the world. They start by accompanying qualified pilots on dozens of transits, learning the canal's currents, depths, blind spots, and behavioral quirks across all weather conditions and vessel types. They progress through a series of licenses, each allowing them to pilot progressively larger ships, starting with vessels under 225 feet, advancing to 526 feet, and eventually earning qualification for the largest Neo-Panamax vessels. For military vessel transits, the ACP assigns pilots with experience on government ships. The pilot boards from a small launch at the canal entrance, climbs a pilot ladder to the ship's deck, sometimes 40 feet or more off the water on a large vessel, and goes directly to the bridge. From that moment until the ship exits the canal, the pilot is in command of all navigation decisions. The transit, hour by hour. A typical Panama Canal transit for an Arleigh Burke destroyer takes roughly 8 to 12 hours from ocean to ocean, significantly faster than the 20 to 28 hours you'd see for a very large commercial vessel, because the destroyer's relatively modest size means it moves faster through channel sections and requires less preparation time at each lock. The transit begins at the anchorage area outside the lock entrance, where the ship waits for its assigned slot. The ACP operates the canal like a precisely choreographed system. Ships are assigned transit slots based on their size, type, direction of travel, and booking status. U.S. Navy warships are classified as vessels of war and are entitled to expeditious transits under the Torrijos-Carter Treaty framework, but in practice, they still coordinate with the ACP's traffic management system. As the destroyer enters the first lock, the bridge watch is fully manned. The commanding officer, executive officer, and navigator are all present. The Panamanian pilot stands at the con, the position where steering and engine commands are given. 2 additional pilots typically assist, one focused on the bow approach and one monitoring the stern. Communication with the mule operators on the lock walls is continuous via radio. Inside the lock, the ship's propulsion is reduced to a crawl, typically 1 to 3 knots. At this speed, the 509-foot ship feels almost impossibly slow. Each lock chamber fills or drains in approximately 10 to 15 minutes, with the water flowing entirely by gravity through underground culverts. As the water rises, the ship rises with it, an eerie sensation described by sailors who've experienced it as being in a very large, very slow elevator. The concrete walls around them climb higher as the water level drops, or sink lower as it rises, until the gates in front open and the ship proceeds to the next chamber. Gatun Locks on the Atlantic side has 3 chambers in a row. The ship rises a total of 26 meters in 3 stages. After that, it crosses Gatun Lake, a man-made reservoir created when the canal was built, which flooded an enormous area of jungle and currently spans about 425 square kilometers. Crossing the lake takes several hours, with the ship on a marked channel through waters that were once a tropical rainforest valley. On the Pacific side, Pedro Miguel locks drop the ship 9 meters, and Miraflores locks complete the descent with 2 more chambers before the ship exits into the Pacific. The crew during transit, what 330 sailors are doing, an Arleigh Burke flight. 2. A destroyer carries approximately 32 officers and 348 enlisted sailors, around 380 people total. During a Panama Canal transit, their activities divide sharply between those with specific transit duties and the majority who essentially get an unexpected sightseeing opportunity. The engineering department maintains continuous watch throughout the transit. The ship's 4 LM-2500 gas turbines must remain available for immediate response. The worst-case scenario during any canal transit is a propulsion casualty that leaves the ship adrift inside a lock chamber. Engineering watchstanders monitor shaft RPM, fuel flow, temperature readings, and dozens of other parameters, ready to respond to any casualty within seconds. The engineering officer of the watch has direct communication to the bridge and to the canal pilot throughout the transit. Damage control teams station at key positions throughout the ship, a precaution against collision or flooding in the narrow canal sections. The ship's navigation team tracks position using GPS, radar, and visual references, providing the pilot with continuous situational awareness. The Combat Systems Department is typically stood down from active readiness during transit. You don't need the Aegis radar or missile systems in a canal lock, but certain defensive systems remain in passive monitoring status. For the other 200-plus sailors who don't have specific transit stations, the canal passage is genuinely one of the most memorable experiences of a deployment. Many congregate on the weather decks, the open area's topside, to watch the transit. It's not uncommon to see sailors lining the rails as the ship enters a lock, watching the stone walls rise around them on both sides, or looking down at the mule operators on the lock walls just meters away. Canal workers and the destroyer crew often exchange waves. Food service continues normally during transit. The galley operates on the ship's regular watch rotation schedule, serving meals around the clock. Sailors on transit watch eat at their stations or in brief breaks. Those not on watch eat normally, sleep normally, and generally treat the transit as an unusual but not particularly demanding day. The ship's store, the barber shop, and other service facilities remain open. Security and strategic posture during transit. A warship moving slowly through a narrow, predictable channel with concrete walls on both sides is tactically vulnerable. The U.S. Navy understands this, and canal transits involve specific security protocols that aren't publicly detailed, but the broad outlines are known. The ship's defensive weapons systems are maintained in a standby condition throughout the transit. The Phalanx CIWS, the last-ditch anti-missile gun, remains in a status that allows rapid activation. The ship's missile systems require longer preparation times and are typically not at full readiness during canal transit, though this varies by operational circumstances. Armed sailors maintain deck watches monitoring the shoreline and surrounding area, and security is heightened compared to open ocean steaming. The Panama Canal Authority maintains a security zone around transiting vessels, prohibiting unauthorized approach by small boats. Panamanian security services patrol the canal banks, particularly during military vessel transits. The U.S. and Panama maintain a security cooperation relationship that specifically addresses canal transit safety, reinforced by the treaty concerning the permanent neutrality and operation of the canal, which gives the U.S. the right to use military force to defend the canal's neutrality if threatened. Transit schedules for U.S. Navy vessels are coordinated through diplomatic and ACP administrative channels and are not announced publicly in advance. The Navy declines to discuss operational details of its canal movements. When Military.com asked the Navy in early 2025 about its canal transit frequency and costs, the service declined to comment and redirected questions to the Office of the Secretary of Defense. What is known from external sources is that U.S. Navy and government vessels transit the canal approximately 40 times per year, representing about 0.3% of the canal's total annual traffic of roughly 14,000 vessels. The money, what it actually costs. One of the politically charged questions surrounding U.S. Navy use of the Panama Canal, particularly in 2025, when the Trump administration made repeated demands about canal fees, is how much the Navy actually pays per transit. According to a Bank of America analysis cited by NPR in March 2025, the average fee for a U.S. warship to transit the canal is approximately $30,000 per transit. This is substantially lower than fees for large commercial vessels. A laden medium-range tanker pays roughly $280,000, and a large container ship can pay over $1 million, with auction slots for priority transit going as high as $4 million during peak congestion periods. The lower fee for warships reflects their smaller size and the tonnage-based fee formula used by the ACP. An Arleigh Burke at 9,300 tons full displacement is a fraction of the size of a modern container ship or LNG tanker. The fee formula is also based on the treaty framework. Vessels of war are entitled to expeditious transit under the Torrijos-Carter treaties, and their fee structure reflects this special status. In February 2025, the U.S. State Department announced that Panama had agreed to waive transit fees for U.S. government ships. The Panama Canal Authority immediately denied that any such agreement was in place. The diplomatic tug-of-war continued for weeks, with the ACP maintaining that no fee modifications had been authorized. The episode illustrates how politically sensitive the canal's relationship with the United States remains, even after 25 years of Panamanian sovereignty. For context, even at $30,000 per transit, the strategic value is obvious. The daily operating cost of a destroyer deployed at sea is roughly $700,000 to $1 million when you factor in fuel, crew costs, maintenance, and mission overhead. The transit fee is trivial compared to the operational savings from using the canal instead of sailing 8,000 extra miles around Cape Horn. Deep dive: the Aegis system and why it makes these transits strategically critical. Here's where things get interesting, because the reason the U.S. Navy moves Arleigh Burke destroyers through the Panama Canal isn't just about getting from one ocean to the other, it's about maintaining persistent global presence with specific capabilities, and the Aegis Combat System is the reason those specific capabilities matter so much. The Aegis system was originally designed in the 1970s and 1980s as a response to the Soviet Union's saturation missile attack doctrine. The idea that enough incoming missiles fired simultaneously would overwhelm any individual ship's defenses. Aegis solved this by integrating all of a ship's sensors and weapons into a single coordinated system, allowing it to track hundreds of targets and engage multiple threats simultaneously. In its current form aboard Flight 3 destroyers, the AN/SPY-6 radar can detect targets with radar cross-sections 35 times smaller than those visible to the previous SPY-1D system. Essentially, it can see things that were previously invisible. But the capability that makes Aegis destroyers uniquely valuable and uniquely worth moving between oceans quickly is ballistic missile defense. As of 2023, 51 Arleigh Burke destroyers were BMD capable, meaning they can engage ballistic missiles in flight using the SM-3 interceptor. This is not a theoretical capability. On April 13, 2024, During Iranian missile and drone attacks on Israel, USS Arleigh Burke and USS Carney fired SM-3s in combat, shooting down at least 3 Iranian ballistic missiles. It was the first combat use of the SM-3 interceptor in history. This BMD capability is why the ability to rapidly move Arleigh Burke destroyers between the Atlantic and Pacific matters so much strategically. A BMD-capable destroyer positioned in the Western Pacific provides a missile defense umbrella over allies and U.S. forces in that theater. One positioned in the Atlantic or Mediterranean serves a different theater. The Panama Canal allows the Navy to shift that umbrella relatively quickly in response to developing crises, something that would take weeks longer if ships had to go around South America. The September 2025 transit of USS Stockdale, DDG-106, through the Miraflores locks, captured on Panama Canal Authority webcam footage, was a real, documented example of this repositioning in action. Stockdale transited into the Caribbean as part of a buildup of U.S. naval forces in the region, joining other destroyers positioned to conduct counter-narcotics operations and to signal deterrence toward Venezuela. The broader strategic picture: why the canal still matters in 2025. The Panama Canal is 110 years old, and it remains as strategically relevant to the United States as it was when President Theodore Roosevelt pushed through its construction at the turn of the 20th century. In some ways, it's more relevant because the geopolitics around the canal have gotten considerably more complicated. China's economic presence in Panama has been a source of genuine concern in Washington for years. 2 of the canal's adjacent port facilities, Balboa on the Pacific side and Cristobal on the Atlantic, were for decades operated by Hong Kong-based Hutchison Port Holdings, which has ties to Chinese state interests. In March 2025, under significant pressure from the Trump administration, Hutchison agreed to sell its Panama port operations. Whether the sale changes the underlying strategic calculus remains to be seen, but the episode demonstrates how seriously Washington views the canal's geopolitical environment. According to ACP data, in 2024, more than 76% of the cargo that transited the Panama Canal had the United States as its origin or destination. The canal isn't just a military asset, it's the backbone of American trade with Asia. Any disruption to U.S. military access to the canal would therefore have cascading effects far beyond pure military strategy. The U.S. currently maintains 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, the largest carrier fleet in the world by a substantial margin, and those carriers cannot transit the Panama Canal due to their size. But the destroyers, cruisers, and submarines that operate with those carriers can and do use the canal regularly. The ability to shift destroyer assets quickly between oceans, to reinforce a carrier strike group, to establish a BMD patrol, or to surge forces for a counter-drug operation, depends directly on the canal remaining accessible. It's also worth noting that approximately 40 U.S. military vessels transiting per year represents only 0.3% of total canal traffic, but those 40 transits punch far above their statistical weight in terms of strategic importance. A single Arleigh Burke destroyer repositioning from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the canal might be the margin of difference between a BMD umbrella being in place before a crisis or arriving 2 weeks too late. Comprehensive conclusion. Moving a $2 billion guided missile destroyer through the Panama Canal is, in every meaningful sense, unlike anything else on this planet. It's a collision of extraordinary military capability and equally extraordinary civilian infrastructure. A 509-foot warship carrying 96 missiles and the most advanced radar system ever put on a warship, inching through a 110-year-old concrete lock chamber guided by electric locomotives and overseen by a Panamanian pilot who answers to no admiral. Consider what actually happens during those 8 to 12 hours. 4 gas turbines capable of 100,000 shaft horsepower are throttled back to a crawl. 8 50-ton electric mules hold the ship centered with cables. Gravity alone moves 197 million liters of fresh water to lift the ship 85 feet above sea level. A civilian pilot with decades of training issues orders to a Navy helmsman. And somewhere in the ship's combat system spaces, a computer that helped shoot down Iranian ballistic missiles sits quietly in standby, waiting for open water. The 380 sailors aboard aren't doing anything glamorous during those hours. They're standing engineering watches, eating in the galley, lining the rails to take photos, and doing what deployed sailors do, adapting to whatever the mission demands. Today, the mission demands patience, precision, and trust in systems and people they didn't design and don't control. The United States has been sending warships through the Panama Canal for over a century. The first U.S. naval vessels transited in 1914, the same year the canal opened. In the decades since, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, hospital ships, and supply vessels have made that crossing thousands of times. The faces on the bridge have changed. The technology has changed beyond recognition. The geopolitics around the canal have gotten dramatically more complicated. And it's quite impressive that after 110 years, it still works.